Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Internet Innovation Alliance webinar, Investing in Broadband in America Future. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. And now I'd like to introduce Bruce Mehlman, founding chairman of the Internet Innovation Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you, Tracy, and thanks to everybody who is joining us today. It's a real great honor to be with somebody that I've admired and watched since Connie Partoyan introduced us maybe a week or two upon your arrival to town. And wow, you've done such a fantastic job. Congratulations on becoming ranking member on everybody's favorite committee. He says to somebody who's not the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee.
Yes.
But before we dive into yet one more video chat, most significantly, how's your family? How's everybody doing?
Well, thanks, Bruce. We're doing great in the midst of a crazy year. The last year it's been a challenging year on a number of fronts, and so many unknowns and fears that we've all been dealing with. You mentioned when I was first elected to Congress back in 2004, I was single, much younger, and got married or met Brian that August after I was elected and got married. We have 3 kids now. They're all school-age kids. So that has created some other challenges certainly in the last year. But Brian is he's retired from the Navy, and so he's taken on the challenges at home. We've been dealing with remote learning and virtual school, and then all of just the challenges before Congress. It's been a challenging time, but yet I'm also reminded of American resiliency and just the American spirit, that even in the toughest times, the examples of people that are stepping up to the challenge and neighbor helping neighbor, it's really been inspiring to me on a number of fronts.
Well, I share that sense of inspiration and awe at friends and neighbors and others. It's the Internet Innovation Alliance I founded back in 2004 with Larry Irving, who had served in the Clinton administration. He actually has the distinction not only of being in the Internet Hall of Fame, but he coined the phrase digital divide. So back then we were well, we're still kind of weird, but we were boosters for this high-speed internet broadband thing, which we thought would be so transformative. You take a look in 2020 and into this year, and we've all been so lucky that it turned out our telecom network was so robust and so resilient. And if only it were available to all, it would truly have hit to all fields. But before we dive into, and again, Internet Innovation Alliance is all broadband all the time. I am interested, as the ranking member of Energy and Commerce, at what you hope to accomplish in such an important role and what your priorities are there.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be serving as the ranking Republican, the lead Republican on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. It's a committee that's been around for a long time, 1795. So it has a rich history, and it has a history of bipartisanship. It has a history of, doing the hard work, plowing the hard ground necessary to legislate and to really in committee address some of the biggest challenges that are facing our country. And as I think about American leadership right now and American competitiveness, whether it is the continued COVID response, the pandemic preparedness, making sure that the vaccines are distributed properly. We had Dr. Fauci and the CDC in front of us even earlier today. This committee's at the forefront. Energy and climate, telecom, telecommunications. I mean, all of these issues that are really at the forefront of our future are before the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I'm really excited about the members that serve on this committee, as well as others that are a part of this committee, but looking forward to going to work and making sure that America continues to win the future. That's my goal. And when it comes to telecommunications, that has only been underscored during COVID. the importance. Yes, we can celebrate. We can celebrate the network. We can celebrate how it really stepped up during a difficult time, a quick transition from the world, life as we knew it a year ago to living life online and transitioning to Zoom calls and virtual schools and telehealth and all of the demands that have been put on our network. It has highlighted some needs that we continue to have, but I also think it's something that we can celebrate, that we have as a country really stepped up and been able to carry a much heavier load, and for the most part be able to provide that connectivity and that certainty to have a good connection. And we're going to go to work on improving it where that also needs to happen.
Well, that's great, and I definitely want to explore a lot of that. You made a great point, which is part of why E&C is maybe my favorite committee. Is it's always there's been a lot of bipartisanship there. It's not a natural home for the culture wars, for example. The way back when I was visiting with Senator Wyden on pre-confirmation, he was talking to me about my political background, and my observation was that when I had worked at Cisco Systems, partisanship stops at the network's edge, and that tech and telecom policy doesn't have to be so team red versus team blue. Chairman Pallone is a thoughtful, capable guy. As you look ahead, where are the areas you think are most promising for bipartisan cooperation?
It certainly is my hope to find that bipartisan cooperation, to be able to work together to address these issues, especially in telecom and technology. Closing the digital divide is one in which it has always enjoyed broad bipartisan support. It doesn't matter where you live in America. Everyone has that shared goal of having that confidence of a connection, and that's only going to be more important as we move forward. It's been underscored during COVID and the continued focus on closing the digital divide, and I believe that is an area where we can find bipartisan support. The Republicans on the committee just recently put forward 28 potential solutions as a part of boosting broadband connectivity. And it's really an agenda that's focused on streamlining the permitting process, removing some of the regulatory barriers, and we would welcome input from stakeholders on the proposals that we have put forward. Certainly getting more funding is going to be part of it, but I also believe that we need to be smart about where we put that funding, and that's why the continued focus on the update of the maps. We passed that legislation last year, the Broadband Data Act, that was really about getting more granular data so that the maps that we're using to determine where federal dollars are going at the FCC or wherever, that they're accurate. I know in my district I represent counties that, according to the map, are 100% covered, and we're not even close. So getting those maps updated is going to continue to be a priority, and I think it's important that we do that before we just continue to appropriate billions of dollars. Securing our supply chains, that's been a long-time priority for Energy and Commerce. The Energy and Commerce Committee had been having some hearings on supply chains around pharmaceuticals, but also on the energy front. I think there's increased recognition as to the control and the dominance of China when it comes to a lot of the renewables and solar and wind and battery manufacturers, and even the fact that they control now 90% of the rare earth minerals. And that, again, I believe there should be bipartisan and will be bipartisan support to really look at our supply chains and making sure that we are not making that we're not making ourselves vulnerable to China on these fronts.
That's a great point. I'm going to want to come back in a moment to both availability and affordability of broadband, which you touched on. But since you've brought up the China angle, at least as I watch, one of the technologies I'm really excited about is so-called OpenRAN, which is bringing America's global leadership and greatness in software as a way to leapfrog the positions of, for example, where Huawei is, which, thanks to a lot of state support and subsidization and other things, has a fairly strong position globally in hardware. And I know you've heard a lot from folks at hearings. I'm interested, as you think about 5G and OpenRAN, how you anticipate the next couple of years going and where Congress can play a positive role.
Well, last Congress, I led on a package of bills around emerging tech, including 5G. And I believe that the deployment of the OpenRAN technologies is really important in helping promote innovation in the United States. It's going to help diversify our 5G supply chain, as well as we're moving to this more virtualized world. And this is an area where there's bipartisan agreement that we want to be leading the world, and we're in a competition. So looking at ORAN, looking at how we make sure that we're leading on 5G. I just wrote a letter with Bobby Rush from the Energy and Commerce Committee to the new Secretary of Commerce that is really focusing on making sure that we continue to build upon the legislation that was passed last year around America Compete, and that we would be leading on these on emerging tech.
And thank you for your leadership. I recall that last year, and those of us in Nerdville downtown were very excited to see that happening. You mentioned mapping, which of course makes perfect sense. It's, if you want to get more broadband, you need to know where it's not. And because historically the maps were based upon, if you have it in any part of the zip code, it's everywhere in the zip code. That was the challenge. When you think about your district, let's assume the maps will help identify. As you point out, there's a lot of gaps, so that where the maps say it's available, it's not. Then what? What do you think happens next that will cause it? Will cause deployment in your district? Obviously, we've been lucky that we have a competitive market-based system. I think that's why American broadband is more innovative. But in a market-based system, deploying in a population dense area is a easier ROI than rural area. Is that hearings coming up, or?
That's noticing a vote on the House floor, but I still have a good half an hour.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. So I'm interested in your thoughts, because you know it so well, the district, it's going to reveal a bunch of gaps. Then what do you think Congress might be able to do to help facilitate the types of deployment in the district that are needed?
Right. That's a great question. My district is one of 435 across the country, but as I look at my district in Eastern Washington, I border Idaho. I represent Spokane, which is a pretty large metropolitan area, and then I represent areas that are flat, the rolling wheat fields of the Palouse. But then I also represent these mountainous regions. And I just share that because one size fits all rarely works, and I think the fact of the matter is, fiber is not going to be economical to get to every area in my district or beyond. And that's where it's really exciting to see how the private sector is stepping up to the challenge. I'm excited about some of the new technology that is being developed right now that I think is going to make smarter sense. It's going to be more economically viable in some of these harder to serve remote areas. I've been promoting the TV white spaces that Microsoft has a couple of demonstration projects in my district that we're really excited about it. One is down in an agriculture region, really focused on precision agriculture and how to make sure that the farmers that are on the cutting edge of using technology to be smarter on their fertilizer application and everything that's involved there, that they need to have that broadband connection. And so the TV white spaces is one that Microsoft is working, I think it's called Farm Beats, that program that they have going. But I'm also excited about, the possibility of the new low Earth orbit satellite companies and what they might make possible. Some based right in Washington State, that have the potential to really change the reality on the ground and serve parts of the country that have been very difficult or economically unfeasible to serve. I think where the government can play the best role is really making sure that we are promoting the most cost-effective way to use limited federal dollars. And, we saw with the reverse auction model, for example, already saved roughly $6 billion in potential RDOF money, and we should continue exploring that.
Yeah, no, that was impressive, and I share your enthusiasm. I'm sure people have already made the joke or observation that in your district you're going to see kind of the new Apple meet the old apples in merging tech and agriculture. Availability is clearly a huge element of what needs to be done, but there's also an affordability aspect to it. For plenty of families, I mean, you take a look at, Lifeline is based upon taxing long distance service as if that's still a thing. And the amount of money that's often available to families doesn't come close to what you'd need to be able to, over the last year, send your kids to school. I don't know if you've seen or you have thoughts on what looks promising to match the availability piece that you clearly have a great handle on with a lot of ideas with what do we do to help those who need help in the same way we help folks with healthcare, we might help folks with food, with food stamps. Broadband sure feels like a necessity. And I don't know if you've seen things or have ideas on how we pair up the affordability piece.
Well, I believe that the key is to continue to use market forces, because it's those market forces that will help identify the most effective technology and really gain the efficiency that we want to see with the federal dollars. So, I would go back to the importance of the maps and getting those maps updated and making sure that we're targeting the funding where it makes the most sense. But I also think America has done a great job. You compare what we've done in America with other countries around the world, and we've seen it with COVID now, that we have some of the fastest speeds at the lowest prices of anywhere in the world. And so that is what we want to, make sure that we continue. We need to have that competition. We need to have a light touch regulatory framework that has created that foundation for us to have some of the fastest internet speeds, the best network quality, the lowest prices anywhere in the world. And research has proven this again and again. And so that's where I think we just, we need to look at what is it going to take to make sure that low income individuals and families that have struggled during this pandemic get the services at prices that they can afford. But we can do that in a way where there's a variety of options, not a one size fits all from the federal government.
That's great to hear, and I very much agree with it. I would note for those, particularly our pals in the working media, who want to ask questions, feel free to use. I think it's the chat function, though I may misdescribe it for GoTo. But I'm happy to serve up a bunch of questions that folks I know who follow you very closely may have. One thing you and I or your team and I were chatting a little bit about, but I mean, as you noted at the start, you're a working mom. I'm a working dad, but two of mine are in college, and my youngest, who when we met, good grief, my youngest was 3, and she's now a high school senior. So I got a whole different set of stuff. But one of the things that I've seen in colleagues, and I suspect you've seen from around your district and you've heard of, but you've also lived, is the challenge now of being a parent, where it's awesome that Zoom and broadband lets you work from home, but it's also really a challenge. And one of the things that a lot of the demographers and a lot of the social scientists note is that this has been harder on working moms on average than dads. You're tremendously lucky with Brian, but I don't know if you have thoughts on what you're seeing from others and things you may take away. The world, we're going to try to get a lot of things back. I can't wait to come back to see you in your office. I can't wait to go back to a restaurant. But I also want to think about how we're more resilient going forward and how we structure the workplace and these sort of assistance technologies to be more helpful to working families. I'm interested in your perspective as a working mom yourself, who's seen how hard it was, I suspect, when you were still back home and the family's right there and you're trying to be virtual, but everybody's under the same roof.
Yes, great question. It brings back memories of a year ago when schools were first shut down in March and April and May, and those were tough days. It was extremely difficult. I was home, on a whole host of conference calls and Zoom calls, really trying to stay on top of everything that was happening. And the kids they were on their own Zoom calls or doing virtual school. And it was challenging just getting through every single day. I found myself just exhausted. And at the end of the week, it was an endurance to get through those days. And there's been, I know I've also seen some of the reports on the number of women that have dropped out of the workforce in particular to be home with their kids. And even in our situation, we hired a gal to come in and help Cole in particular. So he's our almost 14-year-old who has Down syndrome, who's doing virtual school, and he's a great kid, but like a lot of kids, it's hard to keep him focused on virtual school on a Zoom call day in and day out, class after class, and to have somebody that was able just to sit down and make sure that he was staying on track and listening and knew what the assignments were and could do the follow-up. And there's a lot of families that can't afford to do that. I believe it is time to open up our schools. We've come a long way. We can do it in a safe and responsible way. We're seeing more schools open up, and I'm really concerned about our kids as I talk to my own circle of friends and hear the stories of what's going on, not just in our family, but other families. Our kids are in crisis. And part of, the long-term impact of social isolation and virtual school is, I think it's going to have a huge impact on that next generation, both on their school, but also, or on their education, but also on their mental health. The number of kids that are struggling with depression and anxiety and turning to really harmful means to deal with that. The increased suicide rates that we're seeing, it's scaring me. And so I believe that we need to get our schools open, and I'm continuing to advocate for that in a safe and responsible way. But our kids need that, and I think moms and dads need that too. I'm sure we're all kind of suffering from, we're all dealing with our own type of post-traumatic stress and trauma as we have lived through this last year.
Well, I think you're right. And on the one hand, as between having no alternatives and a virtual alternative, virtual's been better, but kids need to be around other kids, and happily all of the data that I've seen from medical professionals and others say that schools are not a dangerous vector, particularly if you take very reasonable and accomplishable measures. I'm struggling at the moment to think that Cole is 14. Holy cow. I remember when he was born. That's just, anyhow.
Well, and Bruce, you make a good point about you think about 10 years ago where we would have been. We would have not had the technology of Zoom and everything that's been made available to us to be able to socially isolate and do so much of our lives from home. So it's incredible what technology has provided to us, and we can all be grateful for that. I have learned that I don't want to be a working mom at home, I guess. It's too chaotic. But the technology, again, is really it's exciting to see what technology is allowing us to do, even during a pandemic.
Agreed. We've got 10 minutes because whatever Carly says, Carly will get. So Carly works for the Congresswoman. And for what little it's worth, the mental health challenges are quite legitimate. The logistics get so much easier when your youngest is 18 because you can tell the kids to go pick up meals and bring home stuff, and they'll text you, "What do you want?" They're getting beer. Here's a question from Jim Phillips, ComDaily. Your Democratic colleagues have released a number of broadband funding proposals they hope to include in an infrastructure package. One of the more recent ones proposes more than $94 billion in spending. Is that level of money something that you're willing to back at this point? Interested in your reaction to, I think it was Congressman Clyburn, and I'm trying to remember the co-author of it, but it's fairly fresh. I don't know if you had a chance to dive in and what your reactions are.
Right. Well, we're certainly going to look at it, and I believe that we do need to put more funding into broadband deployment. It's supported by Republicans and Democrats. It's a big takeaway. For telehealth, for economic growth, we need to close this digital divide once and for all. Whether or not that's the right number, it's a lot of money. We'll go to work on that. I also think that we need to make sure that we're getting the maps updated. It's been a year, and I'm anxious for the FCC to do the work necessary so that we have a clearer understanding of what the need is, where those gaps are. That work is going to help inform us as to what the cost is actually going to be. And then we need to make sure that we're continuing to look at permitting the other challenges beyond funding. Throwing a lot of money at it isn't going to solve it. We have to look at the permitting challenges. We need to look at what technology, as we were talking about earlier, really makes sense in some of these difficult to serve remote regions. But even in the city of Spokane, I know that there's continued challenges around connectivity, and we need to be smart as we move forward. And so I'll be looking at that proposal and hoping to find some bipartisan support.
So you've known me long enough to know, I geek out on a lot of the tech stuff, and what's great about your committee is you see it all. I'm interested over the last year, if there's any particular technologies, whether they're broadband enabled, might be something around telehealth or wearables and, and their ability to help us track and trace going forward. But what have you seen over the last year that you're allowed to talk about that has had you think, wow, that's really cool? Because I'll just, one last thought of context. I think 20 years from now, when we read about this period, an untold story at the moment, because we're all worried about murder hornets, is how much investment and innovation is happening and how this fourth industrial revolution is really getting accelerated. And I really do believe the future will be more productive and more innovative. We're going to live healthier lives. We're going to have easier lives in terms of, how dangerous the workplace might be, for example, thanks to things that were happening that right now we're too stressed out to notice. But the beauty of your committee is you often get an early look, and I'm interested in what sort of emerging technologies or platforms have you seen that made you think, wow, that's awesome?
Well, I completely agree, and it's really an exciting time. My hope is that we usher in a new era of innovation and entrepreneurship. That's part of what happens, and that people have been home, yes, but given extra time to think about those new ideas. So it is an exciting time as I think about what might be possible. I'm excited about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. I really am excited about what they can mean to our lives and the more efficient movement of people and goods. My son with disabilities, mobility for those with disabilities and seniors that should not be driving any longer, the ability for them to get around town and have access to a vehicle, I think is really exciting. I mentioned the precision agriculture earlier. That's really exciting as you think about the future of agriculture. I've been to the hospitals and seen because I represent some pretty rural areas, and a hospital in Eastern Washington that's probably 60 miles out of Spokane has a robot there, so they're doing the remote surgeries now, which is just incredible to be able to see that, and it's happening in Eastern Washington. You mentioned, some of the wearables, that the opportunity for more individualized, personalized healthcare and us living healthier lives, and I've seen the patient monitoring at home, and that is going to really, I think, improve the delivery of healthcare and helping us individually live healthier lives. So there's a lot of exciting technology and new innovation on the horizon, and I hope that we embrace it and lead the world in developing it.
I share your optimism. Carly, you're watching. We've got 5 more minutes, and then I will make sure she does not miss the vote. Here's a question from Andy Ehrlich, Total Spectrum. With the billions of dollars being poured into E-rate and emergency broadband benefit, do you think it's time for Congress to consider reforming the Universal Service Fund? Good question.
Yes, I do think that it's, I'm getting up to speed on some of the new funding that has been made available, as well as the Universal Service Fund. Clearly, times are changing, and it makes sense to me that we would look at the Universal Service Fund and look at some ways to make sure that it's meeting the need as we have it today. So those are some conversations that I look forward to having with the Democrats.
You'd mentioned supply chain resilience, which is really important to a lot of folks. I mean, there's a little bit at the moment, there is a greater demand than current supply, for example, among semiconductor chips, with shortages, multiple millions of shortages of laptops for education, which it's hard to think of a higher and better use right now for semiconductor chips than making sure kids that need digital technology to keep going to school can have it. I don't know. I haven't seen yet what the committee has said its plans are. I'd be interested in how the committee is planning to attack the question and try to come up with ideas and solutions.
Well, nothing has been announced to date, Bruce, but it's an area where I believe there is bipartisan support and a recognition that we need to look at supply chains, and that's been underscored with COVID. We went to buy some bikes this last weekend, right? And the selection was already pretty down, right? And I understand that was one of the, that's just that, I know it's bicycles, but there's supply chain issues across the board, and in the healthcare space, in the pharmaceuticals, vitamin D, the penicillin, the medical, the PPEs, we saw firsthand how vulnerable we are, and that we need to do a better job securing our supply chains. So for both future pandemics, but also to make sure that we are strengthening our, you talk about a fourth industrial revolution and starting in America, it means that we have to have access to these key components that are a part of building and manufacturing. I mentioned the rare earth minerals. 90% of the rare earth minerals now are controlled by China, and we've locked down a lot of our rare earth minerals. These are all pretty fundamentals to building and manufacturing and next generation technology and emerging technology. We need to really be looking at what is happening, and then what we can be doing as Americans. And I wasn't, I'm thinking President Joe Biden did sign an executive order around supply chains maybe 2 weeks ago, and he had Republicans and Democrats at the White House. So that was encouraging to see him moving forward and saying we need to spend some more time on securing our supply chains. And hopefully the committee will get some hearings going very shortly.
I share your hope and enthusiasm, and I do think, given America's ability to be more innovative, ours is a market-based system, so China's central planning allowed them to get a step on us in some of those. But you're seeing some folks, at least I am around the country, who are finding new ways that are far more environmentally friendly to help America restore our supply chains and things like rare earths, and maybe hopefully to lead the world, because we can do it greener and smarter because we allowed competitive forces to identify it. That said, government is a big market maker and has a big role to play, and needs to play a role if we're going to be competitive. I promised Carly I would not have you miss a vote, which I don't know what it is, but I don't want to be the reason you missed it. Congresswoman, you've been a great representative and a terrific friend to broadband. We appreciate everything you've done. Thank you for your time today. I really look forward to doing this live and in person. But thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your service, and thanks for the time today.
It's great to be with you, and I'm really excited about the future, even though this has been a challenging year. And let's usher in that new era of innovation and entrepreneurship together, and do it the American way, American leadership, and then export it to others around the world.
Great. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Thanks to everybody for joining us today.
Take care.
Tracy, back to you.
Thank you. And we thank everyone. We hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Sorry.